Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 722 for September 2nd, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
We'll get, close to 300 gallons out of a run. But then we'll take this whiskey, send it back, and do it again. If you do it twice, you get a better grade of whiskey. And then the old mash that's left over in the pot still there, well, we'll feed that to the cows. There is a little alcohol left in it, and we do have happy cows.
Yeah. 30 years ago, Chuck Miller took his family's history of moonshining in Virginia and went legitimate. Belmont Farm Distillery was the first so-called craft distiller in Virginia, though they didn't use the term craft distiller back then. Now there are 70 distilleries in the Commonwealth, which can trace its distilling history all the way back to 1620. And as they're more than willing to remind you, Kentucky used to be part of Virginia back then. September is Virginia Spirits Month, and I spent several days this week visiting distilleries around the Commonwealth. That story's coming up later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the calendar of events, your voice, behind the label, and taste some Virginia whiskies in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. It's all just ahead on this edition of WhiskyCast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. We are starting to see real impacts now from the trade war that saw tariffs imposed during July on American-made whiskeys by the European Union, Canada, China, Mexico, and other trading partners. Brown-Forman released its earnings report for the first quarter of the fiscal year this week, and while results were right in line with analyst estimates, incoming CEO Lawson Whiting acknowledged, quote, significant uncertainty over the duration of the tariffs.
In most of the markets impacted by the tariffs, we decided to invest behind the continued momentum of our brands, absorbing much of the short-term tariff costs through delayed price increases. This helps our consumers maintain the affordability of our products against a competitive set that is not subject to these tariffs. While this creates some short-term pressure on gross margins, we believe it's the right strategic move to make during a period of uncertainty.
However, that appears to be about to change. Brown-Forman did disclose plans to raise prices for Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve in Europe. That follows price hikes in other markets earlier this summer. The company is basing its move on that best estimate that tariffs will remain in place for the rest of the fiscal year. It's also lowering its profit projection for the year by 10 cents a share. Overall, Brown-Forman sales in developed global markets did grow by 16% over the previous year, while developing markets grew by 11% and U.S. domestic sales were up by 2%. The tariffs are also hitting U.S. craft distillers hard. Catoctin Creek Distillery had planned on 25% of this year's sales coming from Europe, but co-founder Scott Harris says European orders have dried up.
It's not gone away, it's like you send bottles out there, bottles are still in market, but new orders aren't coming in until this is resolved. The 25% extra hit is just too much to bear.
On top of that, Scott and Becky Harris had been planning to add new equipment this year, but the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum imports have raised equipment prices, so those plans are on hold for a while. Elsewhere, Pernod Ricard reported better-than-expected profits in fiscal 2018 and is forecasting another strong year with projected profits in the 5 to 7% range. That's based on stronger U.S. sales for most of its spirits, along with increased revenue in China and India. Jameson continues to outperform expectations, with sales up for the 9th straight year. And on that note, there are reports out of Ireland that Irish distillers Pernod Ricard is looking at plans to build a new distillery. It would be the first new distillery for the company since Middleton Distillery opened in 1975, and The Independent reports that the new distillery will apparently not be built in Middleton. CEO Alexander Ricard did not address the reports during Wednesday's earnings announcement, and Irish distillers executives have declined to comment on market rumors or speculation. In other news, Beam Suntory is working on plans to expand its facilities in Kentucky. Thursday, state officials approved a package of tax incentives for 2 projects in the works at the Jim Beam Distillery in Claremont and the Booker No Distillery in Boston. Beam plans to spend around $102 million on upgrades at the Jim Beam Distillery and about $63 million at the Booker No site. The company's filings did not provide specific details, and Beam Suntory executives say the final plans are still being worked out. Kentucky's Economic Development Finance Authority also approved an incentive package for Heaven Hill, which plans to invest around $6 million on new warehousing at its Cox's Creek site near Bardstown. And just one other distillery note. We now know the name for Douglas Lang & Company's planned distillery along the River Clyde in Glasgow, Scotland. It'll be called the Clutha Distillery. Clutha is Gaelic for Clyde, and the distillery's single malts will eventually carry that name as well. As we reported a couple of weeks ago, planning applications were submitted last month for the project. It's part of the larger Pacific Key redevelopment project along the river. Construction could begin late this year, with the distillery expected to open by the end of 2019. Let's turn to new whiskeys now, and we'll stay with Douglas Lang & Company for a moment. It's kicking off a new private stock series of releases that will only be available through the Douglas Lang website. The first release is a Lechig 21-year-old single cask bottling. Only 84 bottles will be available, and the price tag might surprise you. 125 pounds, around $162 US. Gordon & MacPhail has officially unveiled a new update to its Connoisseur's Choice range of malts. As we reported earlier this year, the family-owned company has been revamping and consolidating its ranges. There are 30 new Connoisseur's Choice bottlings, all at least 30 years old, with prices ranging from 75 pounds up to 500 pounds a bottle. The Urquhart family also released 3 new bottlings in its entry-level Discovery range. They come from Tomatin, Lechig, and Bunnahabhain. September is traditionally National Bourbon Month in the U.S., and it also traditionally means the release of the annual limited edition small batch from Four Roses. This year's edition is even more special because it's celebrating the distillery's 130th anniversary. Master distiller Brent Elliott blended it from 4 of the distillery's 10 different mash bills, using casks from 10 to 16 years old. It's bottled at 54.1% ABV and will go on sale September 15th at the distillery during the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, with wider releases right after that. The recommended retail price, $140 a bottle. I received a sample the other day, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at WhiskyCast.com. This December also marks the 85th anniversary of the end of Prohibition in the U.S., and Jim Beam has quietly kicked off the release of a special repeal batch bourbon. The official announcement is set for a few days from now, but I saw it on the shelves at a Virginia ABC liquor store this week. It's bottled at 43% ABV with no chill filtering, and will have a recommended retail price of $17.99 a bottle, though the Virginia stores have it priced at $14.99. Sullivan's Cove is releasing a new Australian single malt matured for 11 years in an American oak cask. but this cask was previously used to mature Australian tawny port-style wine. It's bottled at 47.5% ABV and is available through the distillery's website for $400 Australian a bottle. That's around $288 US. And speaking of Sullivan's Cove, Master Distiller Patrick McGuire is the newest member of Whiskey Magazine's Hall of Fame. He was honored at Monday night's Icons of Whiskey Australian Awards in Adelaide. Congratulations, Patrick. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. We're also available on Apple News and Google News, too. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Heading out for a road trip soon? Take Highland Park with you, at least the sounds of Highland Park. Look for Highland Park's specially curated playlists on Spotify to keep you cruising down the road like a Viking. And check out the entire range of whiskeys at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, brought to you this week by Bourbon Plus magazine. September is always a busy month, and there's a lot going on. Norman's Kill in Brooklyn, New York hosts a Brook-Laddie tasting Wednesday night, September 5th. Tickets are still available for the inaugural Whiskey Live New Jersey in Paramus on the 6th. Maltstock 2018 is this coming weekend in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, along with Whiskey Bristol Underground in England and the Whiskey Social Belfast in Northern Ireland. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival is September 10th through the 16th, and for the first time, the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame induction luncheon is open to the public. It's on the 14th at the Fraser History Museum in Louisville. The Macallan kicks off its Macallan Manor Roadshow September 11th through the 13th in New York City. The Midlands Whiskey Festival is September 15th in Birmingham, England. 40 Creek's annual Whiskey Weekend is September 22nd and 23rd in Grimsby, Ontario. And we'll have special coverage on WhiskyCast that weekend from Bourbon and Beyond at Champions Park in Louisville. Right now, we have 246 different events on the searchable calendar at WhiskyCast.com. This week, it's brought to you by Bourbon Plus, a new magazine sharing bourbon's soul, culture, and people. The debut issue is coming off the presses right now. Visit bourbonplus.com. That's bourbonplus.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin.
We'll get, close to 300 gallons out of a run. But then we'll take this whiskey, send it back, and do it again. If you do it twice, you get a better grade of whiskey. And then the old mash that's left over in the pot still there, well, we'll feed that to the cows. There is a little alcohol left in it, and we do have happy cows. Yeah.
The oldest record of distilling in the United States dates back to around 1620 in Virginia. Chuck Miller was not around then, of course. His family made moonshine before, during, and after Prohibition, and his grandfather's old truck is parked outside Chuck and Jeanette Miller's Belmont Farm Distillery in Culpeper, Virginia, complete with bullet holes from a run-in or two with the law. There's bluegrass music on the radio, as Chuck took us through his bottling hall with a mix of old and new equipment.
But here's the deal. Bottles come in on pallets at a time. Jump on the platform, they'll run around a cleaner, up here to the filler, around the corner, you get cap or cork, depending on what we got. And depending on the bottle shape, we get the labeler, the glue labeler, we got a shrink wrap, and I got a new labeler over there for other bottles, and the heat tunnel will package them up and away they go. Some of this is older machinery, you might have noticed. That's a 1935 capper over there. Company that makes that machine is still in business. If anybody needs one, just let me know. That's a 1945 filler, great machine. Company's long gone. But I tell you, it did not come with these bungees. That was a later add-on. They weren't invented until 1980, and they really work good. What they do is they pull the filler down to the bottle quicker so you can rotate the machine faster. We're up to 20 bottles a minute now. It doesn't seem like a lot till you get down there, try to put them in a box.
Belmont Farm got its license in 1988. It is not Virginia's oldest distillery. That honor goes to Sazerac's A. Smith Bowman Distillery in Fredericksburg. But Belmont Farm is one of the oldest craft distilleries in the country. Chuck Miller makes bourbon, Virginia whiskey, rum, and moonshine on the farm, which sits right on top of a limestone aquifer.
All right, we got great well water here to make whiskey. It's a limestone water. You need that to make good mash. But when you go to cut the whiskey, you've got to have super clean water to pass those government tests, see? So to clean up the water to cut the whiskey, we got a water softener, sand filter, another water softener, carbon filter, pre-filter, reverse osmosis filter, positive and negative ion filter, 0.02 micron filter, and a UV light. How you like that, huh? I'll tell you what, that water comes out so clean, you're not supposed to drink it. But it mixes real good with alcohol.
Belmont Farm is just one of Virginia's 70 distilleries now, and they're all marking Virginia Spirits Month this month. Gareth Moore of the Virginia Distillery Company is the president of the Virginia Distillers Association.
The way I think about it is, there's definitely a legacy going back, hundreds of years of distilling in Virginia, and we're really in a renaissance in the last 5 or 10 years. And that really starts at home, right? Virginia's our home state, and that's why we're working so closely with ABC to get all of our members access to building their products in their backyard. And I really see Virginia distilling as growing really outside of the state, and that starts with getting that brand recognition of people from out of state thinking that great whiskeys, great spirits come from places beyond Tennessee and Kentucky and Scotland. There's really, really fabulous things in Virginia, whether you're buying from California or you're buying from Florida or you're buying overseas. So I really think of consumers in Virginia as really the starting point of the growth, and then it really moving quickly out of state.
Virginia is a control state. The ABC controls all distilled spirits sales through its own network of stores. But unlike some control states, it's also becoming a model for the relationship between regulators/retailers and distillers. Travis Hill is the chairman of the Virginia ABC.
Every store that we open in Virginia, we look at putting a Virginia Spirits section in there. And I know that well over half of our stores have Virginia Spirits sections. The last store that we opened most recently was in Chesapeake, Virginia. When I walked in, I took this picture for you, Garrett. When I walked in, the shelf, it's a unique store because the shelves actually run perpendicular to the point of entry. The first shelf you see is a Virginia product shelf. The customer has to walk past that shelf no matter where they're going in the store. So that focus on promoting Virginia Spirits as Virginia Spirits and as something that the consumer should take a look at is something that we've really tried to do. And it's been impactful. I travel throughout the country personally, and it's interesting and it helped hit home for me because when I go to that state and if I'm buying a product for the family, I want to buy it from that state because I'm there. I'm not going to have access to that necessarily when I go somewhere else. And so having that same experience in Virginia, I think, is something that's good for consumers, whether they're an everyday shopper or they're from out of state and they're just visiting our stores before they go somewhere else.
But as cooperative and helpful as Hill and his team want to be, they only have so much space on the ABC store shelves. Most of Virginia's distilleries have opened up within the last decade as the craft distilling boom has taken hold, and that has led to a lot of competition. Bill Carlson opened KO Distilling in Manassas with his buddy John O'Mara back in 2015, and together they've had a lot of growing pains.
The hardest part was finding a place. It took us over a year to find this location and a year to build it out. The Commonwealth of Virginia was actually pretty good about working with us to get up and running. They gave us a license in short order. But the hardest part, really, after learning to make the product is learning to sell it. And it's a very competitive market now. When we started, we were the 19th distillery in the Commonwealth. 3 years later, there's 60 to 70. And it's very, very competitive now. That's probably been our biggest growing pain of all.
How hard is it when you're in a control state and the state is your biggest customer, essentially?
Well, it's challenging. I think in our case, the Commonwealth's been very good about giving us opportunities. Of our 7 products, we have 4 of them that are listed, 3 in 100 stores, and our new bourbon, which came out in November, in 20 stores. So we've got pretty good representation, but it's still very much a challenge to try to sell our product in this environment.
So that's why you had to spread out to Maryland, Delaware, and D.C. as well?
That's correct. We have a private distributor in the district, Maryland and Delaware. It's Prestige LeDroit. We've been with them for a couple of years. We sell to the United States Navy and the United States Coast Guard in Virginia and Maryland. That's turned out to be great. They've been great customers as well.
You've seen this explosion in craft distilleries from, as you mentioned, you were number 18 up to 60 or 70 now. What does that do for this state and for the Commonwealth in terms of really building a craft distilling industry that gives you some resources and some clout down in Richmond?
Well, I think the Virginia Distillers Association in the last 2 years has been a tremendous asset for our distillery as well as other distilleries in our industry. We've been able to get things changed. It's slow at times, but things have been changing for the better, both in terms of regulatory environment with Virginia ABC, but also in the legislature. Recently, there's been some changes that have been very positive to us, and looking forward to 2019 for some more.
Does it help when you have enough distillers around the state to the point where a lot of members of the legislature now have a craft distillery in their district, and they're hearing about it from their home constituents rather than somebody from Richmond hearing about it from you in Manassas?
Yes, it helps significantly that we've got strength in numbers. That same thing has been happening nationally. Last year, with the Tax Cuts and Job Act that went into effect, there was a reduction in the federal excise tax. A lot of that had to do with congressmen and senators having constituents now that were making this stuff and said, we need some tax relief. So there is definitely strength in numbers, and the Virginia Distillers Association has very much been a huge resource for us.
So how did you spend your tax cut savings?
Oh, everything that we've got has gone into the distillery. We just did a plant expansion in November. That came online, and we've got a few more years before we're cash flow positive, but the future is awful bright.
When Carlson and O'Mara were looking for their distillery site, they had hoped to build in downtown Manassas, but city and county officials insisted they locate in an area zoned for heavy industrial use. Manassas Economic Development Director Patrick Small says a small-scale distiller might be appropriate downtown, but that doesn't mean they don't value what KO Distilling brings to the community.
KO Distilling offers us a lot of benefits. First and foremost, they're a tourism attraction, and this is an historic city. Tourism is very important to us. It's one of our top industries. Secondly, they're a manufacturer. So not only do they do the tasting rooms, the sales of the bottles out of the ABC store, but they manufacture the spirits here on site, and that takes a lot of capital investment to do so. So as a manufacturer, they pay machinery and tools tax. They pay a higher wage than average retail type stores. So from an economic development perspective, they're attractive in that regard as well. And finally, there's the cachet that comes with a brand like KO Distilling and being able to say we're home to a distiller. We'd love to have more here in the city, but KO is a fabulous corporate partner.
And you told me that they've actually become among your top taxpayers, right?
They are a major taxpayer for machinery and tools. Obviously, we've got some huge industries here like Micron and BAE. But surprisingly, when we pulled the numbers, we were pretty impressed to see KO on the list.
Like most of Virginia's distillers, KO sources most of its grain from local farmers. That's also a boost for the Virginia agriculture industry. Bettina Ring is Virginia's agriculture secretary.
Certainly agriculture is our number one industry and tourism number two. And so if you look at this industry, it contributes so much to both. They source 70% of their product from local farmers, and that has a huge impact on our local economies. It helps keep farmland in place across the Commonwealth, and it keeps families on the land.
What incentives are you able to offer to the craft distilling community in terms of being able to, those who use, say, as much Virginia grain as possible?
We have a unique program in Virginia that we refer to as AFID, and it's an Ag and Forestry Investment Development Fund that allows us to really support those industries that are sourcing their products locally. So they're creating jobs, they're adding value, and they're making sure that they contribute at least 30% of their product that's sourced from local farmers or forest landowners.
Those incentives also helped lure Speyside Cooperage to expand its operations in Virginia. Last month, Speyside announced plans to build a new cooperage and stave mill in southwestern Virginia to go along with its existing stave mill. We caught up with Secretary Ring Wednesday night at the Distillers Association's Virginia Craft Spirits Roadshow, held at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. There will be 2 more road shows over the next several weeks. On September 15th at the A. Smith Bowman Distillery in Fredericksburg, and on October 6th at Chuck Miller's Belmont Farm Distillery in Culpeper. Full disclosure, I was in Virginia this week on a press trip organized by the Virginia Distillers Association, but as always, full editorial control over the content of this segment remains with WhiskyCast. And that's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distillers Edition, and the throwback 8-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Let's start off with the Virginia Distillery Company's port cask finished Virginia Highland Blended Malt. This one takes malt whiskey exported from Scotland and blends it with Virginia Distillery's own young single malt whiskey, then finishes it in port wine casks. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is fruity and aromatic with red grapes, peaches, apricots, soft spices, honey, and vanilla. The taste is spicy with clove and allspice notes, balanced nicely by apricots, peaches, and barley sugar, and the finish is long with spices that fade away gently. I'm scoring the Virginia Distillery Company's port cask finished Virginia Highland Single Malt a 92. KO Distilling matures its bare-knuckle American wheat whiskey for a year. It's bottled at 45% ABV. The nose is aromatic and sweet with honey, caramel candy, vanilla, soft spices, and just a hint of pipe tobacco. The taste is tart and spicy with a hint of lemon zest at first. That's followed by black pepper, honey, caramel candy, and vanilla. The peppery spice holds on through the finish and fades away slowly while the sweeter notes disappear. I'm scoring the bare-knuckle wheat whiskey an 89. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, proud to announce the 2018 edition of Parker's Heritage Collection. This year's edition carries on Parker Beam's legacy of excellence and innovation with a unique bourbon finished in orange Curacao barrels that accent the bourbon's own natural hints of citrus. Once again, sales of this year's edition of the Parker's Heritage Collection will benefit the ALS Association. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Ragged Branch Distillery near Charlottesville makes two types of bourbons with wheat and rye mash bills. The rye version is their signature recipe, and it's bottled at 45% ABV. The nose has soft spices, honey, vanilla, and just a hint of orange peel. The taste starts off with touches of caramel cola and vanilla at first, followed by a nice burst of cinnamon, along with honey, caramel, orange peel, and butterscotch. The finish is long with a lingering touch of cinnamon, along with hints of honey and caramel. I first tasted this one in late July at Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans, and was really impressed with it then. I'm scoring the Ragged Branch Straight Rye Bourbon a 92. Finally, let's look at Catoctin Creek's Roundstone Rye Cask Proof Edition. This one is bottled at 58% ABV, but you'd never know by tasting it. The nose has soft spices, along with toffee, vanilla, honey, and just a touch of charred oak. The taste starts off with touches of raisins and plums, then clove and allspice notes come alive with a hint of coriander, while toffee, vanilla, and caramel add balance in the background. The finish is very long and rich with lingering spices and just a hint of honey. I'm scoring the Catoctin Creek Roundstone Rye Cask Proof a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,300 different whiskeys from around the world at WhiskyCast.com.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. This is what they sound like.
Because you're a cheeky wee blighter.
Dance like. Aye, like that. This is what they do all day. Building the great character of Johnny Walker Black Label. Aging in oak for 12 long years.
Thanks. Oh, it's gorgeous there.
What is character? It's giving a damn.
You're alright, lassie.
Which looks like this, as much as this. See, the land that shapes these people, and the people that shape this whiskey, all shape how bloody good it tastes.
Put the bloody game on the telly, Ella.
A whiskey as bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Cut.
Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. I saw something interesting the other day at the neighborhood liquor store, and it sparked a discussion on social media. You may remember our WhiskyCast HD video segment this summer on Crown Royal's Noble Collection Blender's Mash, and the controversy over the original name for Blender's Mash, Bourbon Mash. Diageo had to change the name to Blender's Mash on both the no-age statement and the 13-year-old Noble Collection versions after objections from bourbon makers in the U.S. And we should note that at the launch party for the Noble Collection version back in June, every single bottle was labeled Blender's Mash. The one I saw on the store shelf Friday was not, though. It was labeled Noble Collection Bourbon Mash, along with an extra sticker across the bottom that read, quote, "This is not bourbon whiskey." I posted a photo of it on Twitter, and Dave Kearns at Real Whiskey Dave responded with this: "I just don't understand why Crown needs to even use the word bourbon at all. I get that bourbon is popular, but Crown is having no trouble selling its whiskey." Well, you've got to keep in mind that Bourbon Mash comes from the Crown Royal Distillery's internal reference for its whiskey made out of a mash bill of corn, rye, and malted barley that is matured in both new and used barrels, and that's why they use the term on the label. Now, from Canada, Joel at Odysseus Unbound on Twitter added this comment: "I'm still waiting for the lawsuits against Glenrothes for their bourbon cask whiskey or Springbank for their Bourbon Wood Reserve. why do those get a free pass? Well, there's a good reason. Those terms refer specifically to the type of casks used in maturing those whiskeys. And of course, they're clearly labeled as single malt Scotch whiskies. The terms are not used to describe the whiskey inside the bottle, and that is the big difference. And as for that "this is not bourbon whiskey" label, Anthony Baker, Whiskey Wingman on Twitter, made this comparison. I liken it to all the Darwin labels required on products these days. They're to prevent idiots from calling lawyers after their foolishness bites them in the arse. Well, it makes sense, since Diageo was allowed to sell through its inventory of the no-age statement Crown Royal bourbon mash in a compromise with the TTB. I suspect those labels were added to the Noble Collection release for pretty much the same reason. Last time around, our Behind the Label segment featured an explanation of the differences between whiskey and fuel-grade ethanol, and was illustrated by my ride with Mario Andretti in a two-seater Indy car fueled by ethanol. We also mentioned the Bruichladdich test of its quadruple-distilled X4 spirit in a Radical sports car a few years ago on Islay. Chris Ratcliffe tweeted this note, "Loved hearing about your two-seater run. I bet you were giddy about that before, during, and after. I thought of the Bruichladdich run when they were with Graves Motorsport. Luckily, it's online, too." And Chris kindly added a link to the BBC's 2012 video of that test with James May and Oz Clarke on Islay. And we'll share that link in the show notes for this episode at WhiskyCast.com. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at WhiskyCast.com or track us down on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Tumblr at WhiskyCast. Our email address is comments@WhiskyCast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's close things out now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and other stuff that makes whiskey unique. You don't see the term sour mash used as much on whiskey labels today as you used to, but it's a key part of the fermentation process. Now, this comes up because a couple of weeks ago I shared my tasting notes for the Wilderness Trail Bottled in Bond Single Barrel Bourbon, and mentioned that it was made with a sweet mash fermentation. What's the difference? Well, the names don't really give us a clue because sour mash whiskeys don't taste sour, and sweet mash whiskeys don't taste sweet, at least because of that. If you've ever had sourdough bread, it's made using the same idea as a sour mash whiskey. The baker adds a bit of fermented yeast, grain, and water to the dough, then lets it rise before baking. Now, in distilling, a little bit of the previous batch of mash is held back instead of being pumped into the still. This backset, as it's called, is added to the next batch of wash and yeast as it's being put into the fermenter, and it helps kick off the fermentation process. And the term sweet mash just means there's no backset added to the wash along with the yeast. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at WhiskyCast.com to get in touch with us. That's also where you'll find links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast brought to you by the Whiskey Exchange. You'll also find the latest news, my tasting notes, events, and much more at the website, along with a complete archive of all of our episodes since 2005. I hope you'll take a minute and leave a review or rating for WhiskyCast on your favorite podcast app or site. That feedback helps other whiskey lovers discover the show when they're looking for podcasts. You'll find us online at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr. Just look for WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.